Alright, time to get into zoning. I'm going to start with level 1 and show you how to create a zone. Create zone up here, new zone, call this AC1-1. You can select a color and then hit assign spaces, and then you're going to select the space or spaces that belong in that zone, and there we have it. Now, I found out that the mechanical system here is going to be VRF cassette units, so that essentially means every room here is going to get its own zone, and then the common corridor area is going to be on a separate system. So as I zone, I'm going to do it according to that. So I'll go in, create my next zone, AC1-2, and proceed from here. Now, this is going to be a pretty straightforward process considering these are all kind of single space zones with the ceiling cassette units that are going to be installed. So you can see where this goes. But if you imagine a VAV type system, something where you're going to actually group some spaces together, your zone would look more like this. You'd be grouping multiple spaces onto one zone. And now the zoning itself, that's the engineer's judgment on which spaces should be on their own zone. And if you need to make changes later, you can select a zone, hit assign spaces, and then adjust your zoning by selecting or deselecting the spaces that belong on that zone. So that might look something like that. But to delete a zone, you can go like that. And with that instruction, I'm going to go ahead and skip to the point where I've zoned this entire building. All right, and there we have it. I've zoned the building. Every space gets a zone. And as you can see, all these office spaces and conference room, they're going to have their own ceiling cassette unit. Whereas the common areas here, I've grouped multiple spaces into a zone, presuming this is going to be a ducted fan coil unit of sorts. This part will be ducted, whereas these are all going to be the ceiling cassettes. So my zoning looks something like that. And one additional note, I've also zoned the electrical rooms and IT rooms, assuming they're going to require some cooling as well. Named them a little bit differently than the rest to keep track of them. And from here, we go to the next step, which is systems. All right, now it's time to group these zones into systems. So I'm going to need some guidelines here. This is a VRF application, and I can't fit them all on one condenser unit. So I'm going to select the basis of design for this system and go off of the limiting requirements there. I'm going to use the Mitsubishi City Multi VRF system as my basis of design. And if I look at my condenser units, the largest one they have is 36 tons, and it gives you some boundaries here. So the cooling capacity is 432,000 BTUs, and the number of indoor units that can be connected maxes out at 50. So I'm going to use these numbers, 432,000 BTUs and 50 units as my limiting guidelines here for placing all of my zones onto one system. And so I'll be checking that as I do my zoning to make sure I don't go beyond those capacities. All right, so now I go to systems, and I'm going to create a system. So I'll call this VRF11. I'll choose a color for that as well. And generally, I'm going to go with different quadrants. I want to select zones that are probably going to peak around the same time to minimize one zone being in cooling while another one is in heating, that kind of scenario. So I like to choose zones that are probably going to peak around the same time. Also, I want to think about my refrigerant lines and the routing. I wouldn't want to place a unit over here and have to route refrigerant all the way down to the other side. So even if I don't hit those cooling capacity, heating capacity, or max number of unit requirements, I may split this up into multiple systems just to minimize the amount of refrigerant piping spanning across the entire building there. Helps with pressure drop and things like that. So let's go in, and looking at this, we'll see how many BTUs I get if I select kind of all of these, but let's get started here. So let's put for sure all of these onto one. And I just want to take a look at my loads for this group right here. So this block, I'm at 48,000 BTUs. 4 tons is what it peaks at. Let's see the detail here. Equipment. Now I would expect more people load. So now that I'm doing this, I'm actually going to go back and I want to get better numbers here for the number of people in the offices. I suspect that the calculated occupant density is actually too low for me. So I'm going to go in and actually hard input the number of occupants for these spaces. Like this office, 217 square feet. It's a decent size office. I bet there's more than 1 people in there, so I'm going to go ahead and bump that up to 2. I'm going to do likewise with this one. And now I'm just going to go through here and start to fine tune this because I want as accurate as possible on this, so I'm selecting my system appropriately. So as I go through and correct all these, I'm going to fast forward and then jump back to my system assignment. Okay, so I went in and I adjusted the number of people for these offices to better reflect what I think is going to be in there. The system load I was getting seemed a little bit low, and I think that's the reason why. With furniture plans, it would be much better, more precise, but this is looking more accurate to me in terms of people load and ventilation. So let me proceed with assigning this system. There's a bit more capacity here. I only have, looks like 13 zones on it, so I've got more room. I think I can cover this entire quadrant with 1 condenser unit. So let's consider this VRF11. I'm going to scroll down here and check my total load. I'm still well within the 430,000 BTU capacity, and it looks like I have 13, 14, 15, and then 31 to 41 is another 10, about 25. So yeah, I'm well within how many boxes can go on one system. So I like this. I'm going to do a similar thing for the other quadrant. And again, all the common areas in the middle, that's going to be on a separate system. So I'm going to do that separately, with the exception of this conference room right here. That can be on this system. Okay, now I'm going to do the other side. Call this VRF 1, 2. All right, so now I have all of these zones, 14, that's 10, plus another 12, 24, yeah, about 25, 26, 27 zones on this, and the capacity on this are sitting around 158,000 BTUs. So this is going to be a good method for zoning these condensing unit farms into systems. I'm going to do halves of the building. You can see section A is going to be on one, section B will be on another, and that'll be per floor. So we'll end up with 6 total systems for our office conference room type spaces, serving all of these ceiling cassettes that are going in. So with that said, I'm going to go through and do the next floor. Okay, so there are my cassette systems. Beautiful. I have 6 of those. 1, 2. Make sure I didn't miss any spaces here. Looks good. Double check the loads here. Almost 200,000 BTUs seems to be likely my highest. Okay. Now I'm going to put the rest of my common areas onto their own system. And it's a lot of internal unoccupied space, so I'll likely be able to put all of those on one VRF system. So I will do that. Up a level. Capture that, and that. Pantry. Under level. Capture that. Okay. That's looking good. Let's make this a little starker of a difference. There we go. The last thing to do here is to put my IT rooms, electrical rooms, and such. I have an electrical room and 2 IT rooms. I'm going to put them on a separate condensing unit. These are probably going to be cooling only, so it doesn't need to be full VRF system like the rest of these. So let's call that CUX1, and place this guy, and this guy. Okay, now I truly have every conditioned space assigned to a zone and assigned to a system. And I'm going to check this system size real quick. 157,000. Yeah, we're well within range. Okay, so that wraps up my zoning, my systems. I have now all of my loads completed and categorized into zones and systems. I can go through and review different zones like this by looking at the preview. I can look at blocks for systems by looking at a preview here. It's really helpful as you're grouping things together to be able to see this. The next step is going to be my system configuration, so I can get some coil sizing, make sure I'm accounting for ventilation properly, and specify my supply temperatures, and then get CFMs for my spaces. So let's get to loads, configuration. Oh boy, here we go.